Hello and welcome to Your Library at Home 2021. My name's Sam Hagan. I manage the library's public programming team. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that we meet on country. I live and work on Gadigal land, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present, and especially emerging. So, welcome again to the library's favourite book club, The B List with Bree Lee. We're really excited to be working with Bree again this year to present a fantastic lineup of authors, which we'll be sharing with you soon. I'm going to hand over to Bree in a moment, but before I do, I'd just like to let you know about a series of events that we're hosting to celebrate this year's Mardi Gras that you might be interested in. We've been working with members of the LGBTQI+ community and are really happy to be presenting a salon series of 3 live shows which kick off next Thursday, the 25th of February. It starts with Burn Me Baby, an evening of merciless, no-holds-barred roasting where 5 of Sydney's most hilarious drag queens will be battling each other for the fiercest reads. So tickets are available on the library's website. But back to this evening's business at hand, our much-loved B-List with Bree. I'm going to hand over to Bree now. She's got some exciting news and announcements and excellent guests. Can't wait to see you all back in the library soon. Hello, Bree.
Hi, Sam. Thank you very much. And good evening, everybody. Thank you so much to the library for committing to another season of B-List Book Club. I am thrilled to be here again. And of course, thank you to everyone who's tuning in this evening. Thank you for spending your Thursday with us. I would also like to acknowledge that where I am in my living room is in Sydney, which is Gadigal land. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And when I say that I acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land, what I also want to take a moment to reflect on in the context of this being a library event is the importance of storytelling and national storytelling, truth and lies, and some of the lies that this nation was built on. And when I say that this is Aboriginal land, I'm acknowledging that sovereignty was never ceded, we still don't have a treaty, and I support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Tonight's guest is a fantastic author whose book is absolutely wonderful. I am so excited to be speaking to Rebecca Starford, who's written The Imitator. It was a real honor to endorse this novel and what I wrote about it, which I think is a good introduction sort of to the book and what we'll be talking about tonight, is that I can't think of a single person who wouldn't love this novel. Both a gripping thriller and a deep character study, it will appeal to those who love espionage epics as well as lovers of literary classics. Starford's handling of her protagonist's internal divisions is assured and completely engrossing. The scene setting rich in historical detail, but never overdone. You'll tear through The Imitator in one weekend, I guarantee it. And to introduce Rebecca Starford, Rebecca is publishing director of Kill Your Darlings magazine and author of acclaimed memoir, Bad Behavior, a memoir of bullying and boarding school, which is currently in development with Matchbox Pictures for adaptation into a TV series. She lives in Brisbane, Australia with her partner and son. Rebecca, are you there?
I am here.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yes,
Hi,
absolutely.
Bree.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being here. Congratulations on your first novel coming out. This is so exciting.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun the past couple of weeks, and I'm just delighted to be talking with you tonight. And thank you to everyone for tuning in.
Good, good. I want to get stuck in straight away, but I just need to remind everyone, I'm thrilled to remind everyone that, of course, I'll be doing a Q&A with Beck, and then I always allow time for audience questions at the end. If you hover your mouse over your Zoom screen, you'll see a little option called chat or Q&A, and you can type your questions at any point in time during my conversation with Beck, and then I will be reading them to Beck at the end of the event, and I'll remind you of that partially way through. Okay, Beck, I want to start with Evelyn, the protagonist of your novel. Something that I found or sort of felt to be so foundational to her character and to these huge issues she ends up dealing with was her education. Can you tell us a little bit about her childhood and what a huge thing it was and what a chasm it created that she started in one family and went to that school.
Yeah, so Evelyn Varley is the protagonist of The Imitator. We meet her, well, I suppose in three different stages of her life. The novel begins when she's in her late 20s after the war's ended. Most of the book details her experiences at the beginning of the war when she's in her early 20s, and then there are sections from her childhood and her adolescence. And she grows up in a small town in southern part of England called Lewes, which is close to Brighton. It's a place that, she has a relatively kind of conventional and normal childhood, but she feels contained by the experiences of her childhood as well. She has a sense that there is life to be had beyond the town itself. She's keen to travel. She's keen to explore those possibilities as well. And I mean, that even from a young age begins to impact her relationship with her family as well, who are modest, unassuming, and in many ways unambitious sort of people. They have aspirations for their daughter, but are in some ways sort of intimidated by the opportunities that present themselves to her. So when she's 12 or 13, she wins a scholarship to go to a school, a prestigious boarding school. I based this on a real school in the UK in the novel. And she goes away, and it's a bit of a kind of rude awakening for her when she arrives at the school, because there aren't many other students like her from more humble and modest backgrounds. And she finds that people are quite rude and snobbish towards her, and she's immediately aware of that kind of contrast between her social upbringing and her social milieu and those of the other girls who are coming from very wealthy and very privileged backgrounds. And Evelyn, makes a decision early on, which I suppose in some ways is quite a kind of exceptional, sort of demonstrates that her, the way that she thinks and the way that she behaves. And she decides, rather than trying to keep pushing herself forward as this authentic kind of person from her background and having a kind of pride and acceptance of her origins, she decides that she'll begin the kind of activities of adaptation and imitation. So, part of her educational experiences are elocution classes, manners. I mean, it's all very old fashioned to us now, but these were quite typical sort of lessons at the time in schools like this. And she begins to adapt and to become just like the other girls around her. And that really begins, again, that kind of cleave from her family. And when she sort of returns home after 1 or 2 terms, she's almost unrecognisable to her parents in the way she talks and behaves. And she begins to think differently and act differently. And that process of imitation has such a profound impact on her development into adult life. That really sets her up, for that kind of collision with the work that she then takes on at MI5, where she's required to just, continue disguising her real self. But of course, she spent so much time doing that already.
Some of the really heartbreaking scenes are when, as a young girl, she knows and is told that this scholarship she has is such an incredible opportunity to sort of, it's that classic class thing of being aspirational, of maybe, she can make this leap in her level of educational acquisition. But then she comes back, like you said, to her mum and dad, and it's so heartbreaking that they feel like somehow she's already betrayed them because she speaks differently. I mean, how much of, I'm just interested that there's such a nuanced just sort of dealing with class in a book that's also a spy novel. Is that, that's a British thing, I suppose, but I also think it's very true of Australia.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I mean, I am interested in class and how class operates, at a kind of personal level as well. The thing for Evelyn is that, this kind of elevation, for sort of want of a better word, from one sort of social sphere to another. I mean, we think of it as elevation, but really it, don't want to give away spoilers, but it does create a lot of problems with her further along in the timeline of the novel. But what she discovers really is that there are limits to how I suppose essentially at the core of herself, how much she can assume this other kind of social identity, because she actually finds herself really hanging between two worlds. It takes her a long time to work that out, but there are those, she has that kind of sense, or almost a foreboding early into the novel, when she, there's a scene where her father drops her off, and there is that sense, the imposing building kind of almost casting a shadow over her as she walks up the steps, and so it sort of spells trouble ahead for her as well. But yeah, I mean, obviously Britain is, as we're all aware, very kind of, the class system is very entrenched in their society, and that was of course a situation in the 1930s when the novel is set, and class plays a big part in the novel, because when Evelyn, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about this later, but when Evelyn does begin her work at MI5, some of the investigations that she's involved in are the infiltration of groups that are, groups that have membership. The membership base is made up of very influential, very highly regarded, very wealthy, sort of prestigious people who belong in those upper echelons of the class system as well. So, she is required to, infiltrate this group and have an understanding of the nuances of these particular groups of people. And she has spent a lot of time doing that already. And I was interested in the way that, she can move in between those sort of social spaces.
The book, so we've just spoken about Evelyn's childhood, which I really wanted to get sort of upfront, because it's obviously so foundational to not just who she is as a character, but the core sort of issues in the novel. But the book actually opens in 1948. And you mentioned just before that it sort of takes place in 3 kind of times in her life. Why did you open it in 48? What do we learn about her in that very first scene? Why is that our introduction to this whole story?
Well, when I first began writing the book, the opening chapter is the first thing I actually wrote, which isn't typical, I think, of fiction writers, that where you began ends up being the beginning of the book. But I had this really clear picture of this woman who we meet at the end of the war. It was very clearly in that sort of post-war period, and she's working in a bookshop in Bloomsbury, and she is diminished. She is something of a shadow of her former self. And obviously, when I began writing, the true extent of her backstory and the events of the novel weren't entirely clear to me. But I had in mind that she was going to be involved in spying during the war to some extent, and that kind of framework gave me the opportunity to begin the book sort of at the end, and then kind of go back to the start. It was just a kind of structure that worked for me. And then, we feed back through at certain times of the novel, kind of check back in with Evelyn in 1948, because this opening chapter, we meet her, she's diminished, but there is a change in her life. She is on the cusp of really establishing a relationship with this man named Stephen, who really cares for Evelyn. It's quite evident, even from those sort of the short fragments within that opening chapter. But she is so withholding from him, so secretive, and she, of course, has this encounter with someone from her past that really is so destabilizing to Evelyn, and it is that trigger, that kind of that catapulting back into the past with this encounter with this woman that she knew during the war. And of course, Stephen has no idea what she did. She's never been truthful with him about her involvement in the war. He doesn't even know that she worked for MI5. So Evelyn, not only is she forced to kind of confront or kind of reveal, or in this case, not really reveal to Stephen what's going on, but she's forced to kind of emotionally go back to that time as well. And that's how we kind of then get into the kind of, the real kind of, guts of the story back at the beginning, and it goes from there.
Yeah, I sort of thought of it almost as like an engine, like the center engine, and then we kind of like pivot up, or I guess forward and back from there.
Yeah.
Let's go there. We go to, is it 39? What is I guess, set the scene for us specifically in London, because I'm sure I remembered reading something in your author's note that you were particularly interested in that sort of time and place when it was like, is the war about to begin? It's easy, so many decades later and with hindsight to think that a particular date or a particular time is when a war started and finished.
Yeah.
But I think your book did this incredible job of showing how sort of sticky and tap toffee like that is when you're actually living in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think when you talk about a spy novel set in World War II, that there are kind of some immediate images and ideas come to mind, and I wanted to not so much subvert those ideas, but look beyond them. So, I mean, for me, I've always been interested in World War II just generally as a historic event. I really like London. I've always been interested in that city. I'm interested in MI5 and the history of it as well. So there are all these kind of elements.
Who isn't?
Really, yeah, I mean, it's come on, it's really fascinating. But I'm not interested. It's not that I'm not interested in these things, but these kind of. I think we're very familiar with the Blitz during London, big kind of historical events that are vivid in our imagination, the D-Day landings, the kind of, the parachuting into occupied France, everything like that. There's been a lot written in fictional form about those events as well. And I wanted to, present someone who was working behind the scenes. I didn't really want to write a novel kind of set amid that particular action. And that period of it was really a year before, from the declaration of the war through till when the Blitz began, that the novel occupies, or really only about sort of the first 8 months of that time. Because what was so interesting to me is outwardly, everyone within the UK, I mean, there were things happening, but it was fairly quiet. The newspapers of the time were calling it the phony war. People were still expecting everyone to have packed up and come home within a year. There was that real sense that appeasement would come, that Hitler would capitulate, that he was still prepared to negotiate. Whereas behind the scenes within the intelligence agencies, things were very frenetic, very chaotic, and to my mind, really, really interesting. And amid this kind of chaos was the opportunity for someone like Evelyn, who is based on a real person, who perhaps we will talk about a little bit later as well. But it was this time in which, and this is what really surprised me during the research, where it was possible to be recruited into MI5. They were doing kind of mass sort of disorganized recruitment. What had happened during the period of the time was that the intelligence service had been warning the government, about a range of things. But the biggest concern during that first year of the war was this idea that there would be an insurgence happening within the UK, within London specifically, because there were so many groups of German sympathisers existing, again, across these within these sort of higher echelon groups of society. And so, the intelligence service was sending out warnings, the government wasn't really listening, and then suddenly things became apparent that work needed to be done. When we meet Evelyn, she's kind of recruited into an office space that used to be an old jail. This is how disorganized MI5 was. They had to move offices because they couldn't even contain their own staff. They were existing alongside prisoners in this jail as well. So there's all these extraordinary stories about, female staff as being told not to walk along particular corridors because they'd excite the male prisoners, and you weren't to wear skirts because, it meant you couldn't walk up. So it's just kind of ridiculous. But that really surprised me, because that seemed to kind of go against our sense of this sleek, organised, really sophisticated agency, when it was actually just a bit of a mess. And so, yeah, so that kind of activity, but the kind of secrecy around that. And again, that's another kind of, I suppose, in that historical sense, all of that was kind of bubbling beneath the surface as well. And of course, so much of Evelyn's work, being a spy, is done behind closed doors. So yeah, the book is really just trying to draw back the curtain a little bit into those activities that were invisible, really, to everyone, unlike those other kind of big historical events that we were talking about before.
Pretty early on, we meet a very rich man named Hugh. I want to talk a little bit more about Evelyn before we talk about, I really want to ask you, of course, about, the woman she's based on and some of the research. We meet a rich man named Hugh. He's picking Evelyn up from the side of the road, putting her trunk in the back of the car, and he says, "We've missed you at the manor." Tell us about this adoptive family.
Yeah, so Hugh is Hugh Wesley, who is the father of Sally Wesley, and Sally is Evelyn's, dearest friend, and she is really the only person or the only girl from Evelyn's childhood, from the school, the boarding school that she went away to, who really came to care about Evelyn deeply, but also in many ways come to care about Evelyn for who Evelyn really was. Sally is a bit of an unusual kind of character. She, in the context of the novel, she doesn't really care much for this sort of sense of social standing. She's a bit eccentric, but she loves Evelyn, and Evelyn understands that relationship and understands but also, there's a shrewdness to Evelyn as well. She understands the possibility and the potential for her friendship with Sally, although she does share, this great affection for her, and they are very dear friends. So, again, after her first kind of term at boarding school, she gets invited to Wesley Manor, which is this beautiful estate in Shropshire, and Evelyn just falls in love with this place. It's just beautiful. It's like nothing she's, ever imagined or ever experienced. And she, in a way, she falls in love with the family and the parents, because this kind of lifestyle and these relationships that are kind of had within, with Sally and her parents is like nothing Evelyn's had before. They, have a deep interest in conversation and culture, and they encourage that within their daughter, and in time they come to encourage that in Evelyn herself. So yeah, they do present this kind of almost sort of surrogate or sort of second family to Evelyn as well. And so, she had been continuing to spend summers down there with Sally. And so, yeah, develops this real kind of affection and bond with the house and with the estate, but also with the parents. And Hugh in particular, is an important sort of figure in her life.
That's where I felt the most sort of resonance with this idea of Brideshead Revisited, where, we have someone from either the working or middle class who makes a friend from this sort of upper level that they've just never sort of experienced before. And yes, there is a proper like love and friendship there. But also undeniably, like it's like stepping through a realm to a magical world. Like the level of riches, the level of plenty is just, it's a different universe.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think the thing for Hugh, there's something, it's not that his affection for Evelyn is also genuine, but there is something a little transactional about it as well, because he understands that Evelyn has been a good friend to Sally, particularly at school, where Sally, again, with her eccentricities, could have been sort of victimized there or kind of picked on. Evelyn acted as something of a protector to her, and that formative kind of primary friendship has really been so important to Sally as well. So Hugh's someone who values that kind of loyalty and that longevity too. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of completely intoxicating when Evelyn arrives there. And again, it's like you say, it's that portal and opens up this possibility. And it's through this family connection of family friends that it enables her to take those steps towards, the recruitment as well. Into MI5, because like a lot of things in this world, as it was back then, it's sort of about who in this respect, even though there were lots of opportunities for young women at that time in the intelligence service. For Evelyn, as it was for Joan Miller, the woman who Evelyn's loosely based on, it was through that family connection that she gets that interview, and that it all happens pretty quickly from there.
This is perfect. I have sort of two questions, and I think that they're related, which is, how is Evelyn recruited by MI5? And I suppose, yeah, the related question of like, tell us a little bit about who this real life woman was, who she's based on.
Yeah, sure. So Evelyn in the novel is, well, she's finished university, so she goes to Oxford after she's finished at school, and she undertakes a double degree at that time, and she also sort of majors in German language, so she can speak German. And when she leaves Oxford, she's not really sure what she's going to do. War hasn't been declared yet. She's feeling a little bit restless. She wants to get to London, and she gets some work at a cosmetics firm. And she's there for a few months and kind of feeling a bit sort of unfulfilled in that role. And she speaks to Hugh on this particular visit that she makes. And he suggests that she gets in contact with someone who works at the War Office. And she goes along and has a meeting with this woman who works at the War Office. And it's just a general conversation and a chat about things. She doesn't hear anything back. Then a few months later, she gets a call, and she doesn't get a call, rather she gets a telegram, and this is based on Joan Miller, and it's quite a mysterious telegram. It's sort of almost in code, where she's instructed to go and catch a bus that's, bus stop outside the Natural History Museum in London. And she gets on that bus, and there's a few other young men and women. Everyone's kind of quiet and not really talking. And they pull up at the Wormwood Scrubs, which was one of the big prisons out in White City. And everyone's sort of looking at each other going, what's going on? And they go in. The men on the bus are sent off in one direction. The women are sent off in another. And that's when Evelyn finally learns that actually this isn't a prison, but this is actually MI5. And she's still not sure what she's doing there, because she's been meeting, previously about work potentially in the War Office. She gets there and she meets with this guy named John Chadwick, who is involved in the transport division of MI5. And he sort of lays out, the offer of work to her, amid the cells and the cries of the inmates and the clattering of, keyboard. And
it's really dank.
It's really quite disgusting. Airless, cold, dirty, sort of
stinks.
It stinks. They, as the women are walking through the prison, they kind of come across a fight between the inmates. So it's not the kind of like typical office environment that we're all used to. But yeah, Evelyn, she's up for this. She wants to do something more, and in particular, she has the idea that perhaps her German will come in useful later on, which it does. But yeah, Joan Miller, the woman that Evelyn's loosely based on, had the exact same experience.
So hang on, sorry. How did you find Joan Miller? Take us back to like square one.
Oh, okay. That is a really good question. I mean, when I had that idea about writing about a female spy in the 1940s, I sort of started to do, that kind of initial research, and I came across her. She's, for aficionados of like early MI5, World War II, history, I suppose she's probably a fairly well-known sort of figure, because she was involved in these sort of high-profile, what became sort of relatively high-profile investigations. But she wrote, I think I first came across her because she wrote a memoir about her time in the service. And she also had a relation, this memoir was really controversial when it was initially published, because in Britain they tried to ban it, or they did ban it from publication.
You always know a book's good when people try and ban it.
Yeah, there's something juicy in there.
Yeah.
And I think because she was still kind of, the Official Secrets Act was still kind of in place in terms of her work. So, but Joan Miller, struck me as someone who wasn't going to listen, wasn't going to take, warning from anyone. So she went to Ireland and had the book published over there. And it came out and everyone was angry and accused her of misrepresenting relationships in various investigations. So, that it wasn't, I don't think it was a wholly reliable document. But, it did establish for me a really clear framework for how someone young and female like Evelyn could be recruited. Some of the conditions within, the actual kind of building of MI5, some of those sort of more, bureaucratic activities that they, that kind of everyday sort of work that they might have done before she kind of really enters into the, the more kind of dramatic aspects of the role. But
nobody likes thinking about the paperwork behind the espionage.
Yeah, and I mean, Evelyn does do a bit of paperwork, but it's more in the sense of, she's keen to put that paperwork behind her and move on to something else. But the thing about Joan Miller that was really interesting as well was that after that book was published in the UK, she had moved, or she was holidaying over in Europe, and her car was run off the road. So the kind of sequence of events was really, I know, so it's kind of like someone needs to sort of actually make a film about Joan Miller's life, because that, again, that biographical element still fascinates me, because she'd angered so many people. So yeah, that structure, that kind of, those biographical details, and in particular the investigations that Evelyn then becomes involved in, were really, really useful for me for that sort of building blocks of research. And then I went and read more and pulled in other various details, and kind of did all of the other research around that. But I read Joan Miller's memoir, which is, it's a really funny kind of document. It's quite jaunty and sort of, very jolly, but she doesn't really talk at all about the kind of emotional or psychological impact of that work. But she did say one thing that really stuck with me, and it was, I don't want to give too much away here, but that she felt such a sense of betrayal through the course of her work, even though the people that she ended up betraying were, these kind of members of this really kind of vicious far-right group.
So she felt the sense of betrayal that she was betraying people, not that.
Yes, when everything sort of came to bear at the end of her investigation, because she had befriended these people and developed, albeit kind of based on lies and disguise, but there was that element, presumably, of kind of authenticity of feeling. I suppose if you spend a lot of time with these people, and also that these people had demonstrated real kind of kindness towards her. Not to almost every other person, certainly not to the groups that they hated, and kind of espoused such kind of vicious views about. But that she developed these relationships, and that she felt she felt very kind of uncomfortable and unhappy by the end of all of that. In spite of the fact that these people were extremely dangerous and sort of needed to be kind of exposed. So that to me was really interesting, because I thought, oh, okay, right, what kind of person, what kind of what's the impact of this kind of work and these sort of investigations on a person? And that's sort of, I suppose, where when we meet Evelyn, we get a sense of how some of that work might have impacted her, and that's how everything sort of started unraveling from there. And I thought, okay, I can start to work my way almost backwards from here, getting a sense of not only the impact of some of this work on a particular character like Evelyn, but what's required to get her into this position in the first place. What are the attributes she needs to be a good spy? So yeah, that was for me a really fascinating aspect of writing the book.
I can see some people are starting to type in questions, which we will get to at the end, but I just want to remind everyone that you can type the questions that you have at any point in time during the chat. Beck, I want to stick with this idea of betrayal, because for everyone listening at home, I also got the chance to interview Rebecca for the library's quarterly literary magazine called Open Book, which is coming out very soon. And Beck, something you spoke about was, I guess, this bigger idea that I'm very interested in, where often writers and authors in particular will find themselves, the way I imagine it is kind of like sort of brushing over or lapping at or trying to repaint the same deep issues. For some people it may be identity, for some people it may be class or whatever. And you spoke really interestingly about this idea of betrayal. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit on this sort of broad level for anyone who hasn't read or isn't familiar with your first book, which was a memoir. and just why this idea of betrayal might connect what people might not otherwise understand as being connected between going from a memoir to a spy novel.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to reflect and draw threads between your own work. I think some of those threads only become apparent sort of long after a book might be out and published, and long after you've been having conversations about this. I mean, when Bad Behaviour came out, there were moments where I felt like I had committed, the grand acts of betrayal against people, because, you're telling deeply sort of private, albeit sort of shared within that social setting of the boarding school environment and within my own family, stories that normally are kept hidden, and are not written about or spoken about as well. And then, of course, there are other sort of acts of betrayal that you feel that you have yourself experienced. But all of that sort of comes within, largely within the realm of kind of female friendship, in particular. And the Imitator does have, that really strong, currents of exploring what female friendship is, how it can be sustained, how it weathers, in this case, grand acts of betrayal, quite kind of extraordinary betrayal, but also those more subtle betrayals as well. And I mean, that happens, Evelyn, does, again, don't want to give away too many spoilers here, but,
the challenge of an hour-long discussion about a spy novel.
It's like... true, but I mean, yeah, I mean, we can probably assume that through her work as a spy, she comes to have to betray people, but unexpectedly, those transgressions are kind of happening against those who are closest to her as well. So yeah, so that was interesting to me. But I think, again, another thread that worked its way through was this sense of a young woman, searching for belonging. I think, I mean, that's a pretty universal kind of idea within fiction, but, in this sense, it's for Evelyn, again, it's that kind of, that social movement, those sort of formative ages, moving from, young adolescence to early adulthood, and then, sort of older adulthood later in the novel as well, but that she's looking for belonging in the wrong sort of places, and that through the kind of circumstances of her upbringing as well, she doesn't have those foundations, those kind of moral and kind of behavioural and psychological foundations that most people have once they reach the cusp of their adulthood, which is something.
It's like she's missing some anchors, and she's just able to like float really far.
Yeah, she's well, again, it goes back to that kind of idea of her desperately trying to fit in and belong to a group of people, and as a result of that, she hasn't kind of built herself up. She is quite hollow. I mean, that's something that I personally, identified with to an extent when I was writing the book, because, I had similar sorts of experiences at school where trying to fit in and belong and get along with people, while at the same time sacrificing other, healthier or better friendships. And at this end as well, it's hard when you're a teenager, you're not even aware of how you do necessarily develop some aspects of your personality. But yeah, there was definitely some anchors missing from me by the time I got to that stage too. So, I didn't expect there to be too many threads between a memoir about a bush boarding school and a woman infiltrating a Nazi group in World War II London, but it's happened. So yeah, but again, those personal betrayals, but also that kind of grand, the kind of grander, more kind of sort of epic betrayals that are happening with that bigger concept of what it is to spy on other people and expose them in that way. So it's kind of the macro and the micro, I suppose, at work in the novel.
Something it was either when I was chatting to you earlier or I read it in an interview with you that really stuck with me is how when we think of espionage and we think of spies in our sort of like collective cultural consciousness, that is a man, and that is a very masculine image. But actually, something that I found so fascinating hearing you speak about some of this research is just how many women were really involved in espionage, but also how shitty it was often that they would be doing this really hectic spy work, but like not even like paid properly, or like given the names of the positions that reflected the actual work that they were doing. And then it just seems like this double and triple injustice, that the way, sort of, at least in, you know, sort of English written literature, I can't speak for other sort of countries or cultures, but the way that spies and espionage have been written about and remembered again and again and again also still ignores them. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, about some of the stuff you found out when you were researching, and your thoughts and feelings about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, our kind of concept, I think, broadly and kind of generally about a female spy is a really kind of cliched
honeypot,
or whatever they call it. Yeah, you know, the honey trap, and you know, it's very glamorous, very kind of over the top, kind of completely unrealistic depiction of what a spy, you know, presumably is now and was back then. I mean, I'm interested in female experience. Within the context of this period of time. So for me, you know, that was what was informing the writing of the book and informing Evelyn's experiences as they are narrated as well. I did do quite a lot of research about, you know, it's kind of tricky. So in the book, Evelyn's handler is this guy named Bennett White, and he's based on a real life character called Maxwell Knight, who Ian Fleming based the character M on from the James Bond films. So he was a very kind of, you know, again, in kind of spy, you know, spy groups, he's this sort of well-known figure. Is very charismatic, extremely eccentric. You know, he used to kind of have all of these animals in his flat, like monkeys and exotic birds and reptiles and all that kind of thing. And he went on to have a career hosting a BBC radio program about nature post MI5. But some of the research I came across was interviews and kind of commentary from him that described this ideal female spy. So there was this, you know, at the time, there was this kind of formula about what a female spy should be. And it was one of the things that I thought about as I was creating Evelyn was, well, how do I kind of incorporate this sort of ideal within, you know, the narrative? Do they talk about this? Does Evelyn reflect on this? And some of his sort of observations, real life observations that this character is based on, I tried to weave into it. So he talks about, you know, the ideal female spy as being, you know, attractive but not overly sexual, because, you know, then they can be kind of, you know, they're kind of diminished if that's what happened. Or
I'm sorry, what's changed? Sexy, but not too sexy.
Yeah, like, smart, but not too smart.
Too smart, yeah.
Same kind of crap that we're familiar with now. But it gave me a sense of the deep misogyny at the heart of this organisation. I mean, that's like, you know, no surprise there. But it also gave me this sense too, and this is what constantly kept coming up, that although women's roles in the intelligence service were so important, so, you know, like Evelyn's work as Joan Mills was, you know, really kind of central to exposing some really, really disturbing things that were happening during that period of time. And other, you know, we're familiar with other very well-known female spies like Nancy Wake, like very, very intrinsic to important operations, but they were disposable ultimately. So, you know, at the end, not even before the war had ended, but Joan Miller had kind of run out of use by about 1943, and she was dismissed. So many of these women, when it came to the end of the war, their contracts, well, they weren't even on contracts, their work was terminated. They were literally sent back home and sent back into the kitchen, and resuming often the role of housewife and mother. And some of them never returned to work again. And that to me was just, you know, I mean, just so sort of mind-blowing and so dispiriting, and obviously not unusual for the period, because so many women who were taking up really important roles across all sectors, you know, all parts of kind of industry and society when men were literally away fighting, then had to kind of retreat after that back to normal life. So that's we all kind of know that. But I was just sort of outraged. I was kind of newly outraged by that. And so I wanted to both present a character who, has real depth, and, depth of the depiction of her life and in her interior life. But I also wanted there to be a sense of authenticity as well about that role too. And so, there is that sense in the way that Evelyn interacts with, even though they're her colleagues, there's still that kind of hierarchy based around gender as well, which is, kind of typical of the period.
Unfortunately, not yet fully left behind.
No.
For everyone playing at home, I have one more question for Rebecca, and then I will start taking audience questions. This is a tricky one, Beck. Apologies in advance.
Ooh, all right.
Without spoilers, what can you tell us about the sort of operation that she is recruited for?
Yeah, okay. So as I've mentioned, Evelyn is recruited into MI5, and it isn't long before her superiors start to recognise her potential in taking on some other sort of, I suppose, more high stakes investigations. And she is tasked with infiltrating a far right group in real historical life. This was called the Right Club. I call it the Lion Society in the novel. And this was a group of men and women, really establishment figures. There were MPs, journalists, very well-known writers of the time, who were pro-German, pro-Nazi, pro-Hitler, and had been collecting and agitating, basically for an insurrection should Hitler invade the UK, which in that early period of the war was at least a real concern. We now know it wasn't really a likelihood, but at the time that
it was like a spectre,
yes, there was that real kind of sense that he could come any day now, and should he cross the channel, that they would be there like little micro cells ready to stand up. And I mean, that was really problematic when some of these people were kind of members of the British Parliament as well. So like Joan Miller, Evelyn is tasked with infiltrating the female division, because, the men and the women had their separate clubs. And the woman who runs the female branch, her name is Nina in the novel. She's a Russian emigre whose family were exiles during the revolution. They had very high standing in Russia, sort of before the Russian Revolution. And Nina runs this group, and she's a very suspicious, very calculating woman. Evelyn has to kind of ingratiate herself within this group, because to report on those activities, and the idea is that she will eventually come to expose them. But in order for Evelyn to ingratiate herself, she has to adopt the attitudes of these women, and that includes amongst other many kind of horrors within their kind of personalities and their group gatherings. They're virulently anti-communist and they're virulently anti-Semitic, and so much of that kind of view is driving their activities and driving the energy of these gatherings as well. So Evelyn really has a kind of she's really kind of awakened to these undercurrents within the society, because fortunately for her, up until that point, she hadn't really encountered that kind of racial hatred in the way that she has to within this role. And it's really confronting for her, and at the same time too, she has to kind of become like one of them. And so that's, that the novel kind of grapples with the way that she takes on that sort of personality, and how those activities and the adoption of that personality then kind of has kind of problems for other aspects of her life.
Ooh, okay, time for some audience questions. We have some good ones. The first one I'm going to take is from Michelle, and the question that Michelle has written is, how a library is important to you as a writer? And what I want to tack on to the end of that is something you mentioned in your author's note about the libraries that you went to in the UK.
Yeah, so thanks Michelle for that question. I mean, libraries are so important, because so much of my research was gathered from libraries, in particular the books that I needed to read, some of that archival material, so old photographs, details around, hopefully creating the authenticity of the period. Old maps were really useful too. I did do a fair bit of archival research in advance of writing the book, so I was lucky enough, in the before times, to go over to England and to spend time at the National Archives in Kew. And I went there for a few days and lodged my requests for these transcripts. Interrogation.
It's like a research dream.
It was really great. I mean, yeah, it was fantastic. It was so funny being over there with everyone else doing their own little projects, just wondering what people were looking up. But anyway, they had recently declassified all of these documents. And so I went kind of specifically, looking for these particular documents. When I got there, I had no idea how to, use the kind of, archival search sort of engine. And they must have thought I was absolutely hopeless. But everyone there was very, very nice and helpful. And I got these transcripts, and it enabled me to read about interrogation processes, the kind of vernacular within these reports, the attitudes, and some of the sort of strategies and tactics, which, some of that, not all of this work ends up in the novel, but as it is for most research that I think writers do for producing fiction, it just gives you that kind of foundation and that flavour kind of, it does kind of work its way in there as well. So yeah, libraries, archives, everything hugely, hugely helpful to me. And I couldn't have written the book without them.
There are two other questions here that I'm going to roll into one, because they very much overlap. They're from both Sally and Meg. Sally's question is, your observation in this novel is so visual and film-like. I can imagine a film in production very soon. Do you write with visual images as you write, or do you write with like the sound of the language? I want you to hold that in your mind while I read Meg's question, which is, I'm wondering if Beck's experience of having Bad Behaviour, the memoir, picked up for screen development impacted your approach to this novel, The Imitator. Were you mindful to keep the potential for adaptation alive as you wrote it? Because it sounds like a gloriously cinematic novel. So obviously there's collective imaginings.
If we can all just keep pushing the adaptation potential, I'd be very grateful. Those are really interesting questions. Thanks for them. To answer your question about the kind of approach to writing itself, I do think I write with image sort of in mind. So much of the, I suppose, preparation for writing the book, and this was the same actually with Bad Behaviour, which might seem a bit strange to hear given it's based on my experiences and my memories. I suppose I'm a kind of experiential writer. I like to be or visit the places that I'm writing about, or refamiliarize myself with those places in the case of Bad Behaviour. So for The Imitator, as I mentioned, that research trip, so I spent a lot of time in London taking photos, walking around, and this is really geeky, but I'd carry a little dictaphone around and I'd sort of speak furtively into maybe I was pretending to be a spy then. I mean, it probably wasn't a very subtle one in my raincoat and runners. Certainly not the glamorous one. And so images, and then I keep folders, of a range of different pictures in order to kind of remind myself of those. I mean, you know, it depends. Obviously, some things you don't need those sort of prompts for as well. But yeah, I suppose that visual association then kind of enables me to produce the work too. But no, I mean, I've certainly not thinking about the structure or the approach to writing with any other adaptation in mind. That certainly wouldn't occur to me as well. But you know, that atmosphere, I think, you know, and setting has been important to both of my books. So I was conscious of producing, I suppose, that setting as vividly and sort of creating that atmosphere as much as possible.
I feel like that's a very flattering question to ever be asked, because what it's also telling you is that when people are reading it, they're seeing a movie in their heads.
But yeah, I mean, yes, that is nice, you know, and yeah, I mean, it would be great, obviously, if something like that happened as well. But it's nice to be asked about processes and craft too, because I really like thinking about and talking about that. And it's, you know, the funnily enough, the two books were sort of written in that same way, very much with, you know, that evoking of place being so important to the kind of shape and the tone of the books.
Wonderful. It is 7:56, which means we have to wrap up. Thank you so very much. Is there anything else you sort of wanted to mention or say before I tell everyone what next month's books are?
No, not at all. Thank you, Bree. That's been lovely. And thank you to State Library, and thanks to everyone listening. It's been really lovely having the opportunity to talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Beck. For everybody else, or maybe also for you, Rebecca, the next B-List Book Club is a special international B-List, which I am really, really excited about. I've mentioned it a million times before. A silver lining of us all going online is that we can get sort of international brains trust. We're going to be hearing from Alice Proctor, who's written a book called The Whole Picture: The Colonial Story of the Art in Our Museums and Why We Need to Talk About It. Alice is Australian born, but is now based in England. And she runs, or I suppose pre-COVID ran for a long time, uncomfortable art tours where she would go and, you know, ask questions about how the big museums and galleries got these works, the colonial history of those places. So that's going to be on Thursday, the 18th of March online. And the super special thing is that Alice will be interrogating a few of the pieces from the State Library of New South Wales's collection at the beginning of the event, before she and I have a Q&A. And of course, then we go to the audience for Q&A. And then the next Australian, so that event is online now. You can go and book in for it totally free. Thank you very much to the library. The next Aussie B-List Book Club is going to be Wednesday, the 31st of March. Debut nonfiction, Lech Blaine's book, Car Crash. We are unfortunately not yet in sort of properly post-COVID times, and we're all working really, really hard behind the scenes to try and get the B-List Book Club back in person as well as online. No matter what, it will be online. We're just trying to get it happen in person simultaneously. So for any of you who tuned into the last event last year with Tanya Plibersek, I'm there in real life with Tanya. There's a group of us at the library, but then I still have an iPad to take your questions at the end of the night. So we're hoping that'll work, fingers crossed, and it's on Wednesday, the 31st of March. Car Crash is not out yet. It comes out, I think, a day or two before that event. So it will probably be one of Lech's first events. And yeah, that's it for the next two B-List events. Thank you so very much for spending your Thursday night with us. I'm delighted to be back at B-List for 2021. One final thank you to the State Library of New South Wales, of course. And thank you so much to Rebecca Stafford. The Imitator is in all bookstores now. Thank you and good night.